Tonight, we're going to dismantle a quiet little image that has probably been sitting in the back of your mind for most of your life. The image of a small silver machine drifting patiently through the dark, still tethered by a thin thread of radio to a room full of engineers on Earth, still ours, still listening, still in some small way coming home to us every day. That image is about to break. Not because it was a lie exactly, but because it was only ever the first 2 seconds of a story that lasts longer than the world. Somewhere out there, right now, as you settle in, as you close your eyes, as your breathing slows, 2 spacecraft, older than most of the people you know, are drifting further from Earth than anything human hands have ever built. They are cold. They are dark. They are losing 4 watts of power every year, like a candle burning down in a room no one can enter. And very soon, sooner than most people realize, we are going to lose them. Not lose them the way you lose a phone. Lose them the way you lose a voice on the other end of a line, when the line finally goes quiet, and you understand that no one is going to pick up again. And here is the question. The strange, small, almost unanswerable question we want you to sit with tonight. When the last engineer turns away from the last screen, and the last dish on Earth stops straining to hear that whisper from the dark, what actually happens to Voyager? Does it stop being ours? Does it become something else entirely? And if a machine drifts for 1 billion years through a place no one is watching, carrying a record of a species that may no longer exist, is it still a spacecraft? Or is it something we don't yet have a word for? Because what most people don't realize, what we barely let ourselves think about, even when we know the numbers, is that the moment NASA finally stops listening is not the end of Voyager's story. It is somewhere around the first sentence of the first chapter. What comes after is longer, and stranger and quieter, and more staggering than most people ever imagine. Before we go any further, if you find this kind of slow, deep exploration of the cosmos as calming and as fascinating as we do, a quiet like or a subscribe really does help this channel keep growing. It's a small thing on your end. It means an enormous amount on ours. Now, come with us, because over the next hour and a half, we are going to travel far past the moment of silence. We are going to sit inside the last few years of the mission in this year right now in 2026, where engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory have just shut down another of Voyager 1's instruments and are quietly preparing a final delicate procedure they have nicknamed the Big Bang. A last careful trick to buy the mission a few more years of breath. We are going to follow that thread all the way to the final instrument, the final measurement, the final command sent from a single 70-meter dish outside Canberra, Australia. The only voice on this entire planet still loud enough to reach that far. We are going to be there when that voice finally stops. And then we are going to keep going. We are going to drift with Voyager into the first century of its silence, when nothing on the spacecraft changes and nothing around it changes, and yet everything has changed. We are going to fast forward through 10,000 years, then 40,000 to the moment Voyager 1 passes within a light and a half of a small red dwarf star called Gliese 445. A star that is racing toward our sun as we speak, and that will. By the time Voyager gets there, be closer to it than our sun will be. We are going to look at the golden record bolted to the side of that spacecraft, and we are going to ask what a message actually is when it is engineered to survive for 1 billion years, in a place where 1 billion years is barely a moment. And then, gently, without hurry, we are going to keep zooming out, past the death of the sun, past the swelling red giant that will one day swallow the Earth, past the collision of our entire galaxy with the Andromeda Galaxy, in a slow, silent dance that will rearrange every star in the night sky. And through all of it, a small cold gold-plated disc, screwed to the side of a machine built in the 1970s, will keep drifting, still carrying the sound of whales and the greetings of 55 languages, and a woman's brainwaves recorded while she thought about being in love. That is the story we are going to tell you tonight. Not the story of a machine that gets switched off, the story of what happens after. And by the end of it, we think you will understand something that most people never quite let themselves understand about Voyager. That the moment we stop listening is not a funeral. It is not even a goodbye. It is the moment a small piece of us stops being ours and starts belonging to something much, much bigger than we know how to name. So before we begin, one small question for you, a personal one. Think back to the last time you truly, quietly listened to something that could not answer you. A photograph, a letter, a voice on an old recording, the stars above your house on a summer night. Something that was there and real and completely indifferent to whether you were paying attention. What did you feel? Did it feel like the thing was slipping away from you? Or did it feel like it was already, secretly, somewhere very far ahead of you, going somewhere you could not follow? Sit with that for a moment. Because that feeling, that exact feeling, is the feeling we are going to be walking with for the rest of tonight. Tell us about it in the comments if you'd like. We read them, we really do, and there is something quietly beautiful about a stranger describing a moment of listening to another stranger in the dark. Now, before we drift out into the long silence, before we watch the last signal fade, we have to start where the story still lives. We have to start with what Voyager is tonight, at this exact moment, as you and we are speaking. Because right now, in this very hour, those two spacecraft are still whispering back to us. The line is still open. The conversation is still going. And it is that conversation, quieter, more fragile, and more astonishing than almost anyone realizes, that we have to understand first, before we can understand what it means to lose it. So let's begin, gently, with the whisper that is still reaching us. So let us begin, very quietly, with where things actually stand tonight. Right now, as you are lying there, as your room settles into its own quiet. As the small sounds of your house become the only sounds in the world, Voyager 1 is drifting through interstellar space at a distance of roughly 25.5 billion kilometers from the Earth, 16 billion miles. About 168 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Numbers on their own that are meaningless. Numbers so big they slide off the mind like water off glass. So let us try to hold them for just a moment in something the mind can touch. Imagine a beam of light, the fastest thing there is, leaving the Earth right now, leaving the roof above you, leaving your city, leaving the atmosphere in a single blink. That beam of light does not reach Voyager 1 in a second. It does not reach it in a minute. It does not even reach it in an hour. It takes almost a full day. 23 hours and change at this moment in 2026 for the fastest thing in the universe to cover the distance between us and that small, aging machine. And later this year, in November, that spacecraft will cross a threshold that no human-made object has ever crossed before. It will be one full light day away from Earth. A single day at light speed of separation. That is where Voyager 1 lives now. Voyager 2, its slightly younger sibling, though they were launched only weeks apart in the summer of 1977, is a little closer, about 21.5 billion kilometers out, nearly 13 billion miles. Both of them have crossed the boundary of the heliosphere, that great, invisible bubble of solar wind and magnetic field that our sun blows around itself like a slow, patient breath. Both of them are, in the truest sense of the word, no longer inside our solar system's atmosphere. They are outside, in the ocean, in the dark between, and yet tonight we are still talking to them. Let that sink in for just a moment. Because it is easy to hear those numbers and think of Voyager as something already lost, something already historical, something in a museum with a plaque under it. It is not. There is a thin, delicate, almost impossibly quiet conversation still happening, right now, between a room full of engineers in Southern California and two machines older than most of the people reading this. Every day, in careful shifts, teams at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory sit in front of screens and read the whispers coming back from the dark. Every day they send commands out. Every day they wait. And what a wait it is. Because Voyager 1 broadcasts back to us with a transmitter of about 23 watts. 23 watts. That is roughly the power of a small refrigerator bulb. That is less than the light in the corner of your bedroom. That is a whisper. A whisper being screamed, in the only way a machine knows how to scream, across 16 billion miles of vacuum. And by the time that whisper reaches the Earth, by the time it finally touches the enormous dishes we have built to catch it, its signal has faded to something staggering. The power arriving at our antennas is roughly 20 billion times weaker than the power needed to run a digital wristwatch. 20 billion times weaker. Try to hold that in your head. Something you could not run a watch with, arriving on this planet and being decoded letter by letter, bit by bit into science, into a message, into a voice. That is not a machine that is gone. That is a machine that is still somehow gently speaking to us. And every word it says takes a very long time to travel. When an engineer at JPL sends a command up to Voyager 1 today, that command flies out through the deep space network, leaves the Earth, and races out into the solar system at the speed of light. 23 hours later, give or take, it arrives at the spacecraft. The spacecraft receives it, thinks about it in its own quiet way, executes it, and then sends a reply. That reply, in turn, takes another 23 hours to come home. So a single round-trip conversation, a single question, and a single answer takes almost 2 full days. You ask something on a Monday morning. You get the answer on a Wednesday morning. And in between, everyone on this planet just waits and hopes and listens. There is something deeply human about that, something almost old-fashioned. In an age where our messages fly across the planet in fractions of a second, where impatience is the default emotional weather of our species, there is a small team of people whose entire professional life is built around the discipline of waiting 2 days for someone to answer them. And the someone is a spacecraft, and the spacecraft is drifting further from them every second. Remember the image we started with, that mental picture that has probably been sitting somewhere in your mind since childhood. The little silver machine, tethered to Earth by a thin, patient line of communication. It is not a lie, not yet. Right now, tonight, in 2026, that image is still true. The line is still open. The tether is still stretched, thinner than a spider's web, across a distance that has no meaning in ordinary human words, but it is still there. Every day, every hour, every whisper of 23 watts crossing the dark. But here is what makes tonight, this particular year, this exact stretch of time, so quietly extraordinary. That line is fraying, not because anyone is choosing to cut it, not because of some dramatic failure or accident, but because of physics, because of a small, slow, absolutely unstoppable process that has been happening every second of every day since the summer of 1977, when both spacecraft were sitting on their launch pads at Cape Canaveral, warm with the heat of their own plutonium. Every year, each Voyager loses about 4 watts of power. 4 watts. A number so small it is almost embarrassing to say out loud. And yet, over nearly half a century, it has hollowed those spacecraft out from the inside. Instrument by instrument, heater by heater, whisper by whisper. There is less voice than there used to be. There is less warmth. There is less light. And the engineers at JPL know, with the calm clarity of people who have been doing this longer than most of us have been alive, that the line will not stay open forever. It will end, and it will end soon, which brings us gently to something worth pausing on before we go any further. Because before we talk about the ending, before we walk out to the edge of the silence together, take a moment, right now, and think about who or what you keep in touch with across a distance that feels impossible. Maybe it is someone you love who lives on the other side of the world, whose voice comes to you through a screen at strange hours of the night. Maybe it is a memory of someone who is no longer here, whose voice you still, somehow, hear in your head when you need it. Maybe it is a version of yourself from years ago that you sometimes catch yourself writing letters to without ever putting them on paper. Whatever it is, hold it for a moment. Because that quiet, stubborn, absurd act of staying connected across a distance that should not allow it, that is exactly what a small team of engineers is doing, right now, with 2 machines older than most marriages, at a distance that makes the word far almost meaningless. Tell us in the comments who or what you stay in touch with across your own impossible distance. There is something beautiful about that answer, whatever it is. And now, having sat with that thought for a moment, we have to turn toward the harder part of the story. Because to understand what happens after we stop listening, we first have to understand why we will stop listening at all. It is not a decision anyone at NASA is making. It is not a budget cut. It is not a change of priorities. It is a matter of 4 small watts disappearing every year from a power source that was built when Jimmy Carter was still in his first year in the White House. And so, before we can walk out to the edge of the silence, we have to go inside the spacecraft. We have to look very carefully at the small, glowing, radioactive heart that has been keeping Voyager alive for almost 50 years. And we have to understand exactly how that heart is fading. At the center of each Voyager, tucked into a small cylindrical housing on a long boom that sticks out from the main body of the spacecraft, there is a lump of a silvery gray metal called plutonium. Not a fuel, not exactly. Not a battery, not exactly. Something older and stranger and quieter than both. A material that does one thing and one thing only. It gets warm, all by itself. In the coldest, emptiest place we know how to reach, that small lump of plutonium sits there patiently and glows with heat. Not with fire, not with light, just with a slow, radioactive warmth given off by the decay of its own atoms. That warmth is Voyager's whole life. Around each of those lumps of plutonium sits a device called a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. A name so long and technical that even the engineers just call it an RTG. It is a simple, brutal, beautiful piece of engineering. It takes the heat coming off the plutonium and, using no moving parts, no fuel injectors, no combustion, no wind, no motion of any kind, it converts that heat directly into electricity. It is the closest thing we have ever built to a machine that runs on the passage of time itself. As long as the plutonium keeps decaying, the generator keeps making power, and plutonium is very patient. It decays slowly, over a span of decades, over a span of centuries, over a span so long that when Voyager launched in 1977, engineers were not really worried about the plutonium running out. Nobody expected to still be talking to the spacecraft in the 21st century. Nobody expected to still be talking to it now. But here is the quiet, unavoidable truth of a machine that runs on decay. The very same physics that gives it life is also, slowly, killing it. Every year, without fail, without pause, without exception, each Voyager loses about 4 watts of usable power. 4 watts a year, every year, for 49 years now. If you sit with that number for a moment, you begin to feel the shape of what has been happening quietly out there in the dark for almost half a century. When Voyager 1 left the Earth, its RTG produced somewhere around 470 watts of electricity, enough to run a small home appliance, enough to power its instruments, its heaters, its computer, its transmitter, its cameras, everything all at once, with a little to spare. Today, that same generator out there in the interstellar dark produces less than half of that. The candle has been burning down, not fast, not dramatically, just steadily 4 watts at a time every trip Earth makes around the sun. And so, for years now, the engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory have been playing a very slow, very careful, very heartbreaking game. They have been switching things off, one at a time, starting with the least essential and working their way inward toward the last, brightest embers of the spacecraft. Heaters that kept some of the instruments warm on cold nights in deep space, off. The cameras whose last images were taken in the early 1990s, staring back at a pale blue dot that was Earth, off decades ago. Backup systems, redundant electronics, small comforts, off, off, off. Every year, the spacecraft grows a little smaller, a little quieter, a little more concentrated on its own survival. Every year, the number of things Voyager can still do goes down by one. In March of 2025, engineers turned off the cosmic ray subsystem on Voyager 1. Later that same year, they shut off one of the science instruments on Voyager 2. And then, this year, in 2026, something happened that changed the mood in the mission room in a way that is hard to describe. On a routine day in late February, Voyager 1 was going through one of its slow, careful rolls in space, a little maneuver it does now and then to help calibrate its instruments, and its power levels dipped. Not dangerously, not catastrophically, but enough. Enough to bring the spacecraft frighteningly close to a threshold called the undervoltage limit, a kind of automatic panic mode that would have shut down critical systems and forced the engineers into a multi-day recovery process, screaming commands across 16 billion miles of vacuum. Hoping the patient would come back, they did not want to get that close again, so they made a choice. On April 17th of this year, 2026, a small team at JPL sent a command up to Voyager 1. That command took nearly a full day to arrive. And when it did something that ended a story that had been running quietly, almost without interruption, since the summer of 1977. It switched off the low-energy charged particle instrument. Nearly 49 years of measurement, a run so long that the instrument had outlived most of the people who had built it, ended in a single, silent command. One small light in the mind of the spacecraft went out. It had been our eye on the pressure of interstellar space, our finger on the pulse of the dark between the stars, and now it was gone. The engineers, in a quiet, almost tender gesture, left one small part of that instrument still turned on, a tiny motor, drawing about half a watt that would keep the sensor rotating in the dark, just in case. Just in case, somehow, someday, power came back. Just in case they might, one day, wake it up. It is the kind of small mercy engineers show to machines they have loved for a long time. That shutdown bought Voyager 1 about a year, maybe a little more, 12 months of breathing room. And in that year, the team is racing to finish something they have been quietly designing for a while. They call it, with a kind of dark humor that only spacecraft engineers can really appreciate, the Big Bang. It is not a dramatic maneuver. It is not a rescue. It is a very careful, very risky choreography of switches. The idea is to swap out a whole group of older, more power-hungry components all at once, turning some things off, and turning quieter, more efficient alternatives on in one single, coordinated move. The name comes from the way it all happens together in one burst, one moment, one decisive breath. If it works, it buys them years, maybe a decade, maybe more. They are testing the procedure on Voyager 2 first, right now, through this May and June, because Voyager 2 is a little closer and has a little more power to spare and is, in a sense, the safer patient. And if that goes well, no sooner than July of this year, they will try the same procedure on Voyager 1. If it works, some of what was turned off might even come back on. That small motor, still turning in the dark, might once again have a purpose. The instrument might feel a little warm again. There is a chance. There is always a small, stubborn engineer's chance. But even in the very best case, even if the Big Bang works perfectly on both spacecraft, even if nothing else goes wrong for years, everyone in that mission room knows what they are looking at. They are looking at the end game. Somewhere in the 2030s, if the spacecraft survive that long, the power margin will grow so thin that even the last science instrument will have to be switched off. And after that, only the engineering systems, the transmitter, the receiver, the small computer that keeps the spacecraft pointed roughly the right way, will still be running. And after that, one by one, those will go too. It is not a question of if. It is only a question of when. There is something very human about this stretch of the story, something almost domestic. Because if you have ever cared for something or someone that was slowly losing its brightness, an aging parent, an old dog, a piece of technology you had grown fond of, a friendship that was quietly running out of light, you already know exactly what the engineers at JPL are doing. You already know that particular rhythm of small, gentle sacrifices. You turn off a heater to save power for a heartbeat. You put away one memory to make room for the next. You accept, in a way you never speak out loud, that every choice you make is a choice about which small light gets to keep burning and which one gets to go dark first. It is the arithmetic of love against entropy. And it is exactly what a small team of scientists in a room in Southern California has been doing for many years at the edge of the solar system. So a small question before we move on. Have you ever watched something you cared about grow quieter? Not disappear, not vanish, not die dramatically, just get a little smaller each year, a little less loud in the world, a little more contained in itself. Maybe it was a person, maybe it was a place, maybe it was a version of yourself. What did you learn from that watching? What did it teach you about paying attention? Tell us, if you feel like it, in the comments. There is something quietly beautiful about a stranger describing that kind of tenderness to another stranger in the dark. Because here is what is coming next. Even now, with the plutonium fading and the instruments falling silent one by one, none of it, absolutely none of it, would matter if there were no one left on Earth who could still hear the whisper. All of this, the 4 watts a year, the shutdowns, the Big Bang, the small motor still turning in the dark, is only meaningful because there is still someone on the other end of the line. Someone, or rather something, on this planet, straining night after night, in the middle of the outback of Australia, to catch the last, faint syllables of a voice from beyond the edge of the solar system. And that something, that one single ear pressed against the sky, is a story of its own. A story of an antenna older than the mission it is listening to. A story of the one place on Earth that can still hear Voyager. And it is where we need to go next. Just outside the city of Canberra, in a broad, dry valley in the south of Australia, there is a place where kangaroos still wander through the grass at dawn, and where the hills roll gently under a sky so clear that on some nights you can see the smear of the Milky Way from horizon to horizon. It is quiet country, sheep country. Nothing about it, on first glance, feels like the front line of a conversation with the outer edge of the solar system. And yet, if you drive out into that valley and look up over the low ridge, you will see something that does not belong to the landscape at all. A vast, white, curving dish, 70 meters across, larger than most buildings you have ever stood inside, tilted patiently toward the sky, waiting, listening, sometimes speaking. This is Deep Space Station 43, DSS 43 in the shorthand of the engineers who love it. And it is, tonight, the single most important object on the surface of the Earth in the story we are telling. Because here is a small, staggering fact that almost nobody outside the space community really thinks about. Of all the radio dishes on this planet, and there are many, many radio dishes in Spain, in California, in China, in Russia, in India, in observatories on mountaintops and in valleys on every continent, there is exactly one that can still send a command up to Voyager 2. Exactly one. And it is that 70-meter dish in that quiet Australian valley, listening to the sky in the southern hemisphere. If DSS 43 goes down, if it has to be taken offline for repairs, if a storm knocks out its power, if something breaks that no one can fix in time, there is no other voice on this planet loud enough. And no other ear on this planet pointed the right way to reach that particular spacecraft. Voyager 2, because of the strange arc of its trajectory out of the solar system, dips below the celestial equator in a way that only the southern hemisphere can see. The dishes in California and Spain simply cannot look far enough down to find it. Only Canberra can. Only that one dish. For Voyager 1, the situation is a little more forgiving. Its path took it upward, out of the plane of the planets, and so it can, when needed, be reached by the enormous dishes at Goldstone, in the deserts of California or Madrid, in the hills west of the Spanish capital. But even for Voyager 1, the 70-meter dish at Canberra remains the loudest voice in the room. When the Deep Space Network, that quiet worldwide constellation of ears, needs to send a serious command to the spacecraft, when it needs to trust that the signal is going to make it all the way out to 16 billion miles, and be understood, it is DSS 43 that leans in. And leaning in is the right phrase for it, because a 70-meter dish is not a static thing. It is a machine that moves. It rotates on enormous bearings. It tilts, slowly and precisely, on rails and gears designed decades ago and lovingly maintained by people who understand every rivet of them. Its pointing accuracy is measured in fractions of a degree so small that they are hard to picture. To reach Voyager, the dish must aim at a specific patch of the sky no larger than the head of a pin held at arm's length. And it must hold that aim without wavering for hours at a time, as the Earth itself rotates underneath it, as the spacecraft drifts a little further away with every second. It is the closest thing we have ever built to a machine that stares. And when it stares, when it finally locks on to that impossibly faint whisper coming home from the dark, what it hears is barely a signal at all. Remember the number we spoke of a little while ago. The transmitter on board Voyager broadcasts with about 23 watts, less than the bulb in the corner of your room. And by the time that broadcast crosses the almost unthinkable gulf between the outer edge of the solar system and the fields of Canberra, it has faded so much that the power arriving on the surface of the dish is, again, roughly 20 billion times weaker than what you would need to run a digital wristwatch. The word faint does not really cover it. The word whisper does not really cover it. What DSS-43 is listening to is closer to a rumor of a voice. And yet somehow it hears it. Night after night, week after week, year after year, that dish picks up that impossible whisper, gently amplifies it, feeds it into cooled receivers built to be quieter than almost anything else on Earth, and turns it into data, into numbers, into science, into a message. The engineering behind that is not just remarkable. It is, in a very old sense of the word, a miracle, not a supernatural one, a patient human miracle, built by people, cared for by people, kept alive by people. But the same people who built and maintained DSS-43 will tell you, if you press them, that this arrangement has always been a little fragile. There are only 3 70-meter dishes like it in the world: Canberra, Goldstone, Madrid, spaced roughly a third of the way around the Earth so that at any given time, at least one of them can see any given spot in deep space. 3 dishes holding up the entire back end of humanity's conversation with the outer solar system. Not just Voyager. Every deep space probe we have ever sent past Mars leans in one way or another on those 3 antennas. The Voyagers, the pioneers back when they were still speaking. New Horizons on its long, slow journey past Pluto. Every distant robotic explorer we have ever launched. All of them, at some point, whisper home through one of those 3 enormous ears. And in a hemisphere with only one such dish, one small event can silence everything. There was a stretch of time, back in 2020, when DSS-43 had to be taken offline for critical upgrades. Aging equipment, decades old, needed replacing, and there was no way around it. For 7 long months, the dish sat quiet, being carefully rebuilt, its feed cones lifted off by cranes, its transmitters and receivers being swapped out for newer generations that could keep working for decades to come. During that stretch, Voyager 2 could still send its own whispers home. The smaller dishes at Canberra could still listen, but nothing on Earth could reply. For 7 months, in a very literal sense, humanity had no voice to send back. Voyager 2 was talking and we could hear it, but we could not answer. Imagine that. Imagine for a moment a friend on the other side of the world calling you night after night, telling you about their day, and you can hear every word. but your microphone is broken and you cannot say anything back. You can only sit there and listen and hope they know you are still there. That is what those 7 months were like. For a small team of engineers who had spent their working lives in conversation with a machine that had, at that moment, no way of hearing that they were still on the line. When the upgraded dish was finally brought back and the first test signal was sent up to Voyager 2 in the autumn of 2020, and roughly 37 hours later, a reply came back confirming that the spacecraft had heard and understood and executed the commands. There were apparently tears in the mission room, small ones, engineer tears, the kind that get wiped away quickly. And in 2025 and 2026, DSS-43 had to be brought down again in staggered stretches for further work, partly to make sure it can keep talking to the Voyagers, and partly to prepare it for the return of humans to the moon, and for the crewed missions to Mars that are being planned over the next decade. Every time that dish goes offline, even briefly, the mission planners at JPL find themselves counting the days on a calendar, waiting for the narrow windows in which they can once again send commands up to Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. They have gotten very good at using those windows, but they know that each window is smaller than the last, and each conversation, in some quiet way, might be one of the final ones. And this is where the shape of the ending begins to reveal itself. Because the truth is, Voyager will not fall silent all at once. It will fall silent unevenly, in pieces. First, some instruments will go, then more instruments. Then, eventually, sometime in the 2030s, if all the careful plans hold, the last science instrument will be switched off. And after that, only the engineering signal will remain, the quiet hum of the spacecraft telling us it is still there, still pointed roughly the right way, still alive in the most basic sense. And even that will not last forever. Somewhere in the years after the last science ends, the transmitter itself will grow too weak, the power too thin, the dish on Earth too distant to hear it. And the line at last will go quiet, not with a slam, not with a click, with a fade. There is something almost unbearably tender about the fact that the last moments of that fade will most likely happen over a dish in a quiet Australian valley at night, with kangaroos moving through the grass beyond the fence, and a handful of engineers in a control room in California sitting in front of their screens watching the signal-to-noise ratio drift lower and lower and lower. Nobody will get a phone call. Nobody will get a press release at first. Some patient man or woman will look at a screen and understand, quietly, that what they are looking at is no longer a signal from Voyager. It is just the background hiss of the universe. And they will lean back in their chair and rub their eyes and go tell the person next to them. And then, someone will pick up a phone. Before we walk out to the moment of that fade, take a small breath for yourself. And a small question, if you will. If you knew that a conversation you had been holding open your whole life was going to end tomorrow, a conversation with a person, with a place, with a version of the world you used to know, what is the one last thing you would want to send? Not the whole speech, not the summary, just the one small message, the one word, the one sentence, the one small signal that you would want to leave hanging in the air after the line went quiet? Tell us in the comments. There is something quietly extraordinary about hearing what strangers would send as their last transmission to the thing they have loved. Because next, we are going to walk out into that final year. That last stretch of time in the 2030s, when the plutonium is nearly spent, when the Big Bang has bought its final years, when even the small motor still turning in the dark has finally gone still. We are going to be in the room, in Canberra, and in California in the last, delicate weeks of a conversation that has lasted longer than most human relationships. We are going to be there for the moment the signal goes from a whisper to a hush, to the flat, gentle static of a universe that no longer has anything to say to us about that particular machine. And then, quietly, we are going to take our first step past the silence. There is no ceremony planned. That is one of the first things you have to understand about the way this ends. There will not be a countdown. There will not be a stage. No president will step up to a microphone in a rose garden and read a speech about the closing of a chapter in human exploration. Not, at least, in the way we usually imagine these things. Because the truth about the end of the Voyager missions is that it will not happen on a single day. It will happen the way old things really end, in pieces, over months, over years. Until one morning, someone looks up from a screen and realizes that the thing they have been listening for is simply not there anymore, and has not really been there for a while. But let us walk out into that time gently together. Let us step, just a little, into the 2030s. By then, if everything holds, if the Big Bang procedure being tested this year in 2026 works as the engineers hope, if the plutonium keeps decaying at the rate physics has always promised, if nothing dramatic goes wrong in the intervening years, each Voyager will be running on a single precious science instrument. On Voyager 1, most likely, the magnetometer or the plasma wave subsystem, a small ear pressed against the sea of charged particles beyond the heliosphere, listening for the faint music of the interstellar wind. On Voyager 2, something similar, just one instrument each. Just one small window still open in the spacecraft's mind. Everything else, the cameras that took the last portrait of the pale blue dot, the cosmic ray detectors, the particle counters, the imagers, the heaters that once kept fragile parts warm, all of it dark. All of it long since turned off, one by one, in a long, slow retirement that has been going on for decades. And then, sometime in that decade, nobody knows the exact year, and it depends on how the Big Bang goes, and on 100 small variables that even the best engineers cannot fully predict. The last science instrument will have to be switched off as well. The power margin will grow too thin. The choice will come down to this. Keep the instrument alive for another month and risk the whole spacecraft going into an emergency shutdown, or switch it off cleanly, gently, on our own terms, while there is still enough electricity to keep the transmitter breathing. The engineers will choose the second option, because they are engineers and because they have loved these machines for a very long time, and because They know exactly what it looks like when a patient goes into cardiac arrest rather than being helped to a peaceful sleep. So on some ordinary morning, in some ordinary week, in some year in the middle of the next decade, a small command will be typed by a small team, and it will be sent out through the enormous dish at Canberra. And roughly a day later, that command will arrive at Voyager 1 or Voyager 2, and the last instrument will go quiet. It will not be dramatic. There will not be a sudden noise. There will just be one final packet of science data, followed by nothing, followed by silence, followed by the strange, muted knowledge spreading slowly through a room of quiet people that they have just heard the last thing the outer solar system will ever have to say to them. And even that will not be the end. Not entirely. Not immediately. Because after the last science instrument goes off, there will still be something left. The spacecraft's transmitter and its receiver and its small computer and the tiny handful of systems that keep everything else running will still be alive. Not doing science, not measuring anything, just being. Just holding themselves together in the dark. And the transmitter, that small 23-watt whisper, will still be sending its signal home. Not with any measurements to report, not with any new discoveries to share, just with a quiet, steady tone, a carrier, an engineering signal. A way of saying without saying, I am still here, I am still here, I am still here. For some period after the science ends, mission engineers will keep listening to that tone. They will use it to check that the spacecraft is still healthy, still pointed roughly the right way, still willing to answer when spoken to. They will send small commands up now and then. They will use the fading signal as a kind of long, patient lullaby, a way of saying good night to a friend who has not quite fallen asleep yet. They will do this partly because they can. Partly because there is still always the very faint hope that some small trick, some clever bit of engineering they had not thought of before, might squeeze one last measurement out of the machine. And partly, if we are being honest, because it is very hard to let go. But 4 watts a year is a merciless arithmetic. Eventually, even the carrier signal will fade. Not because the transmitter dies, not because the spacecraft explodes, because the power that keeps that transmitter warm and pointed and speaking will drop below the level required to run it at all. And when that happens, the signal will simply, gently cease. There will be no last words. There will be no goodbye. There will just be the last time somebody checks the ratio between signal and noise and notices, very quietly, that the ratio is now indistinguishable from the background hiss of the sky, that the whisper is no longer even a whisper, that there is nothing left to hear. Nobody knows what day that will be. Nobody knows if it will happen first for Voyager 1 or for Voyager 2. Nobody knows if there will be a formal announcement or a small blog post or a footnote in a science journal, or just a quiet email that circulates through the community saying in careful, measured language that as of such and such a date, no further contact with the spacecraft has been possible, and no further contact is expected. But some morning, in some year, in some decade of a century that has not fully arrived yet, that email will be written, And that will be the thing you and we might, if we are still here, remember later as the day Voyager fell silent. Sit with that image for a moment. A single email, a short one, written by a person who has probably spent a large part of their working life in the company of one of these spacecraft. Read by a small group of colleagues who understand, more than anyone else on Earth, what those words mean. Passed quietly to reporters, who will write short pieces that will run somewhere between the sports section and the weather. It will not lead the news. There will not be candlelight vigils in every city. Most of humanity will not really notice, because most of humanity will be busy doing what humanity does, arguing, working, loving, sleeping, watching some other event unfold, some other machine take off, some other name rise. And Voyager will slip without a splash, without a bell, without a sound, from the category of things we are still in touch with, to the category of things that are simply out there. But here is the strange, quiet thing. And this is the part that changes the whole story. This is the part that most people, when they think about the end of the Voyager missions, never quite lets themselves think through to the end. Nothing on the spacecraft actually ends. Nothing on Voyager 1, nothing on Voyager 2 physically stops on the day we stop hearing them. The spacecraft do not fall out of the sky. The spacecraft do not disintegrate. The spacecraft do not vanish. The spacecraft do not know that anyone has stopped listening. They cannot know. They have no way to know. There is no bell that rings inside them, telling them the conversation is over. There is only the same slow 4-watt-a-year decay of the plutonium, the same slow chill spreading through the electronics, the same steady drift outward at more than 60,000 kilometers per hour, the same trajectory that has been running since the summer of 1977. When the transmitter goes silent, it is not because the spacecraft has decided to stop speaking. It is because the whisper has become too quiet for any dish on Earth to catch. But the whisper is still there. Faint, fainter, approaching zero. And even after the transmitter itself finally can no longer be powered, even after that, the spacecraft still exists, still drifts, still points roughly the way it was pointing when we last saw it. Still carries, bolted to its side, that small, patient, golden disk, waiting for a listener that may never come. And here is what this actually means. This is the reframe you have to sit with, because it is the door we walk through for the rest of tonight. The end of the Voyager missions is not the end of Voyager. The end of the Voyager missions is the end of us listening to Voyager. That is not the same thing. Those are not even close to the same thing. The spacecraft is not the mission. The mission was the conversation. When the conversation ends, the mission ends. But the spacecraft goes on, cold, dark, quiet, unwatched, unheard, undisturbed, and in some strange, deep sense, a sense that most of us are not entirely comfortable with, and that we may need to sit with for a little while before it starts to feel like a truth we can hold. The moment we stop listening is the moment Voyager stops being ours and starts being something else, something we do not fully have a word for. Because up to this point, ever since 1977, Voyager has been a machine on an errand. Hours on our errand, in our service, reporting home, speaking to us, waiting for our commands. That is what a spacecraft is in the ordinary sense of the word. But after the signal ends, all of that changes. It is no longer on an errand. There is no one to report to. There is no home in any operational sense. There is no command coming. There is just the spacecraft and the vacuum and the trajectory and the record and the dark. It is not a spacecraft anymore exactly. It is something more like an object. Or maybe, more strangely still, something more like a small, drifting piece of the Earth itself, thrown out into interstellar space, now belonging to no one and to nothing, but the trajectory it was given long ago. That is not a sad thought, though it can sound like one at first. It is a very old thought. Humans have been doing this for as long as we have been human. We have carved names into stones and set them adrift in rivers. We have tied letters to the legs of birds. We have folded paper boats and pushed them into the sea. We have written our children's names on trees and walked away. Every time we have known in some quiet part of us that the moment we let go of the thing is the moment it stops being a message from us to the world and becomes something else. A small object out in the world on its own, belonging to itself. Voyager is going to become that. In the 2030s or thereabouts, on some ordinary morning, without ceremony, without warning. A small question before we walk on. Have you ever had to let go of something or someone in a slow way? Not a dramatic parting, not a fight, not a funeral, just a gradual, gentle, undeniable understanding over weeks or months or years that the conversation was ending and that soon the last message would be the last message and there would not be another. What did it teach you about endings? What did it teach you about who owns a thing once you have stopped talking to it? Tell us, if you feel like it, in the comments. There is something almost sacred about a stranger describing that kind of slow letting go to another stranger in the dark. Because now, having watched the signal fade, having sat with the room in Canberra and the small email that goes out, and the reporters who write short pieces and the world that mostly does not notice, we have to do something strange. We have to leave the Earth behind. We have to leave the mission behind. We have to leave the engineers, the antennas, the calendars, the news, all of it, and go out to where Voyager actually is. Because the story we started tonight was not the story of the mission. The story we started tonight was the story of the spacecraft. And the spacecraft, at the moment the signal fades, is still just at the beginning of a journey so long it makes 50 years look like the first breath of an infant. In the very first century of its silence, when everything on Earth continues without it, and everything around it stays exactly, precisely the same, that is where we need to go next. Out into the first 100 years of the quiet. So let us go out to it. Not to Earth, not to the mission room, not to the dish in Canberra with its patient white curve tilted toward a sky that no longer holds the voice it used to catch. Let us go instead to where Voyager itself actually is, on the morning after the signal fades. Let us stand for a moment in the vacuum beside it and see what there is to see. There is not much. That is the first, strange, quietly astonishing thing. There is not much. There is a small machine about the size of a compact car, though shaped nothing like one, hanging in the dark. Its long, thin booms stretch out from its body like the arms of something patient. Its high-gain antenna, that great white dish nearly 4 meters across, still points more or less back toward the sun, back toward the world it left. Not because anyone is telling it to, not because it knows, but because a long time ago, in a language of gyroscopes and small puffs of hydrazine, it was told to hold that pointing, and no one has told it otherwise. And there is nothing in interstellar space strong enough to nudge it off that aim in any timescale a human being can feel. So it holds. Silently, steadily, as if still listening for a call that will never come. Around it in every direction is nothing, or almost nothing. The interstellar medium is not empty in the strictest sense. There are, per cubic centimeter on average, a handful of hydrogen atoms and a whisper of dust. But by any standard our minds can grasp, this is emptiness. The best vacuum any laboratory on Earth has ever produced, at any cost, using any technology, is thousands of times denser than the space through which Voyager is now drifting. If you took every atom in a room the size of your bedroom and spread it out at the density Voyager is experiencing, you would fill a volume larger than the Earth itself. This is not empty like a desert. This is not empty like the deep ocean. This is empty like an idea, and that is where the spacecraft now lives. And here is what happens to it in the first century of its silence. Nothing, almost nothing at all. There is no oxygen to corrode the metal. There is no water to freeze into the seams. There is no wind to move a bolt. There is no air to whistle across the antenna. There is no rust. There is no rain. There is no rot. The soft golden sheen of the record on its side does not tarnish, because tarnish requires atoms to react with, and there are almost none. The aluminum cover does not oxidize, because oxidation, again, requires oxygen, and there is almost none. The thin gold plating stays gold. The copper underneath stays copper. The screws stay tight. The paint, where there is paint, stays where it was. Even the shadows on the spacecraft, the sharp, black shadows cast by parts of the body onto other parts of the body, stay exactly as they were on the last day sunlight touched it. And the sunlight, by the way, is still touching it. Faintly, very faintly. Even 16 billion miles out, even beyond the heliopause, the sun is still, from Voyager's point of view, the brightest star in the sky. Not a warm sun, not the sun any of us have ever known. Just a hard, cold, blue-white point of light, brighter than any other, holding its place among the more distant stars. If you were floating beside Voyager, you would see that point, and you would know, without needing to be told, which one it was. That is the star our species evolved under. That is the star that made every drop of water in your body possible. From out there, it is one small dot among many, beautiful, distant, silent. And Voyager, for the first century after the signal ends, drifts under that dot at about 17 kilometers per second, which is, by the way, more than 60,000 kilometers per hour, which is, by the way, faster than any bullet ever fired on Earth. In the first year of its silence, it will move roughly 500 million kilometers further out. In the first 10 years, 5 billion. In the first century, roughly 50 billion kilometers. And still, in all that distance, in all that unimaginable travel, nothing around it will really change. The stars will not shift noticeably. The sun will not perceptibly dim. The great, slow architecture of the local neighborhood of the galaxy will look almost exactly the same as it did on the day the last signal went home. Because 100 years in interstellar space is nothing. It is not even a breath. It is not even the beginning of a breath. It is the first small twitch of a muscle before the breath begins. Meanwhile, on Earth in that same century, everything you know changes. Everything. Think about that for a moment. Think about what a century actually does. A century ago, at the time we are speaking, there were no televisions in most homes. There was no penicillin. There was no polio vaccine. There were no transistors. There were no satellites. There was no internet. There was no idea in any but the wildest science fiction of a machine sitting at the edge of interstellar space transmitting data back to Earth. The people who were alive then, every single one of them, are now gone. Every face, every voice, every love story, every argument, every fear, all of it folded away into the past, held only in photographs and letters and the memories of people who themselves are mostly now old. That is what a century does to us. That is the arithmetic of 100 years on the human scale. And out where Voyager is drifting, that same century does essentially nothing. The spacecraft moves. It moves an enormous distance by our reckoning, and a completely trivial distance by the reckoning of the space it is moving through. Everything on it stays almost exactly the same. The plutonium continues to decay, of course, but the plutonium was already so nearly spent by the time the signal faded that there is very little more it can lose. The last flickers of warmth in the RTG eventually drop below any level that would matter for anything, and the interior of the spacecraft settles into the deep, absolute chill of interstellar space, which is only a few degrees above absolute zero. The electronics freeze. The wires freeze. The delicate glass of the instruments freezes. But glass and wire and metal, in the absence of anything to react with, do not much care about being cold. They just sit there, frozen, waiting. There is one thing on the spacecraft, though, that is still, in a sense, moving. And it is one of the strangest things to sit with, if you let yourself really think about it. The last radio signal Voyager ever sent, the last transmission, the last whisper, that final quiet packet of engineering data before the transmitter fell below the threshold of usefulness. That signal did not disappear when we stopped being able to hear it. It kept going. Radio waves, once they leave a transmitter, do not just stop. They travel at the speed of light forever unless something absorbs them. And in interstellar space, there is almost nothing to absorb them. So the last thing Voyager ever said to us is still, right now, expanding outward through the galaxy in a growing sphere, thinner and thinner, weaker and weaker, but not gone. Not gone at all. 100 years after the signal ends, that final message is 100 light years across. 1,000 years after, 1,000 light years across. And it does not stop. It only fades. It only spreads. It only becomes, over unimaginable time, a whisper so faint it is essentially indistinguishable from the background of the universe itself. But it does not stop. That is the last piece of the mission that keeps going after the mission ends. The message itself, rippling out through the dark, past stars that will never notice it, into an eternity we cannot follow. And this is where the first hard, quiet thought of the night arrives. Because a century after we stop listening, Voyager is, in every meaningful physical sense, exactly the same object it was on the day we stopped. The plutonium is nearly spent, but it was nearly spent already. The exterior is untouched because there is nothing to touch it. The record is still bolted to its side, still catching the faint blue-white light of the distant sun. And yet, in every meaningful human sense, everything has changed. Because we are no longer looking. Because no one is measuring. Because no one is asking, night after night in a room in California, whether it is still there. And so the question quietly begins to shape itself. If a thing exists and nothing changes about it, and yet no one anywhere is paying attention to it, does it still exist in the same way? Is it the same object? You have felt this before. If you have ever walked past a house you used to live in, years after you moved out and looked in through the window, and seen a stranger's furniture in the room where you used to sleep. The room is the same room. The walls are the same walls. The floor is the same floor. And yet, in some quiet, undeniable way, it is not the room it was because you are not the one inside it anymore. The room has been claimed by a different life. It has stopped being yours. That is what happens to Voyager in the first 100 years of silence. It is not that the spacecraft changes. It is that the spacecraft stops being the thing you knew. It becomes a stranger's room. A thing that exists, that is real, that is still exactly where it is supposed to be, but that no longer belongs to the story you were in. Which is a strange and quietly humbling feeling to sit with. Because most of us, if we are honest, have things in our lives that we still hold onto, even though we have stopped talking to them. Old friends we have not called in years, but who still feel somehow like ours. Places we have not been back to, but that still live inside us as if they were. Versions of our younger selves that we have long since stopped writing to, but that we still consider, in some quiet way, part of who we are. We hold on to these things by paying a small, ongoing attention to them in the back of our minds. We keep them warm with a very small 4-watt attention, year after year, the same way JPL keeps Voyager warm with the last of its plutonium. And so, a small question before we move on to the longer stretches of time. Is there something or someone you have quietly stopped being in touch with, but that you still, in some small part of you, feel is yours? What would it mean to admit that they are no longer in that room? That the room now belongs to someone or something else? Would you feel loss? Would you feel a strange, unexpected relief? Would you feel the kind of gentle, awed peace that comes when you finally let a thing be its own thing, not yours, not lost, not held, just its own? Tell us, if you'd like, in the comments. There is something quietly beautiful about a stranger describing that kind of small, unspoken letting go. Because now, having sat with a single century, having watched 100 years of essentially nothing happen to the spacecraft, while 100 years of essentially everything happens to Earth, we have to lengthen our stride. A century out there is just a first small step. To feel the real shape of Voyager's future, we have to move through time in bigger jumps. 1,000 years, 10,000 years, long enough that the shape of human civilization itself becomes something we cannot easily guess at. Long enough that whole languages come and go on Earth, whole ideas of what a country is, whole religions, whole species. And still out there, the spacecraft drifts. Still out there, the record stays gold. And somewhere in the middle of all of that long, quiet, patient drift, Voyager finally, for the first time since leaving Earth, begins to enter a region of the solar system almost no one ever really thinks about. A place we have never seen and only ever inferred. A place so vast and so cold and so nearly empty that even the word solar system begins to lose its ordinary meaning inside it. That is where we are going next, out gently into the long thousands, and into the region humans call, without ever really having touched it, the Oort cloud. To go where we are going next, we have to stop thinking about time the way we usually think about it. We have to stop counting in years, in decades, in lifetimes. We have to start counting in something more like geology, in something more like the long, slow inhale of a mountain range. So take a breath and let us step forward together into the long thousands. 1,000 years out where Voyager is drifting is enough time for the spacecraft to move somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 billion additional kilometers away from Earth. That is a number so large it does not really behave like a number anymore. It slides through the mind and out the other side without leaving a mark. So try this instead. 1,000 years after the signal fades, the spacecraft that once took 23 hours for light to reach will now take something like 2 days for light to reach. Then 3. Then more. Every year the light towers between us and it grow a little longer, and around it in every direction the same enormous emptiness, the same faint, cold, blue-white point of a distant sun, the same great slow architecture of stars almost unmoved from where they were the day the signal ended. 1,000 years out there is barely long enough for anything nearby to shift its position visibly. Voyager is moving. Everything around it is moving. But the distances are so great that motion becomes almost invisible, the way a river, seen from very far above, looks like it is not moving at all. And on Earth, in that same 1,000 years, everything changes again. And this time, we do not really know how. Because think for a moment about what 1,000 years actually does to us. 1,000 years ago, at the time we are speaking, the great cathedrals of medieval Europe had not yet been built. The city of London was smaller than most modern suburbs. Nobody in the entire world had ever seen a printed book. Nobody had ever taken a photograph. Nobody had ever heard a recorded voice. The very idea of a person on the surface of the earth being able, from a chair, to speak in real time to another person on the other side of the planet, would have been indistinguishable from magic or from the description of a god. That was 1,000 years ago. That is the size of 1,000 years on the human scale. Now try to imagine 1,000 years going the other way. Try to imagine the world of the year 3000. Try to imagine what your descendants, if any of them still exist, will be doing, what language they will speak, what they will wear, what they will believe, what they will call themselves. Whether they will live on Earth at all, or in some other place we have not yet dreamed of. Whether they will still be recognizably human, or something quieter, or something stranger, or something so different from us that if we met them, we would not know what to say. That is the future in which Voyager will still be drifting, essentially unchanged, through the same faint dust and the same faint hydrogen and the same distant stars. And the humans, if there are humans, will look up at the sky, and the sky, at least the bright part of it, will not look very different from the one you can see from your own roof tonight. But they will not be us. They will be as far from us, on the human scale, as we are from the people who first stacked stones to build the pyramids at Giza. And out beyond all of that, still holding its aim, still carrying its record, will be the small, silent shape of the spacecraft we left behind. Now go further. Push the number by another factor of 10,000 years. 10,000 years ago, on Earth, agriculture had just been invented. The first villages were only starting to form in the fertile valleys of the Near East. Human beings had been on the planet in more or less our current form for a long time by then, but almost nothing that we now think of as civilization existed yet. No written language, no wheeled vehicles, no coins, no armies, no countries. Just small groups of people learning, for the first time, how to grow their own food and how to stay in one place long enough to build something that would last. 10,000 years, therefore, is roughly the age of everything you would recognize as human history. Every empire that has ever risen and fallen, every religion that has ever been born, spread, and either endured or vanished, every war that has ever been fought, every book that has ever been written, every song that has ever been sung, every love that has ever been remembered. All of it fits inside a window of about 10,000 years. And 10,000 years is what we now have to travel through in a single breath to see the next stage of Voyager's drift. In that stretch of time, the spacecraft moves an enormous distance, by our standards, and a nearly comical distance by the standards of the region it is passing through. Because somewhere in that long, quiet drift, 10,000 years or so after the signal ended, Voyager begins to enter a region of the solar system that we have never seen with our own eyes, and that most people, even people who love astronomy, rarely think about with any precision. A region called the Oort Cloud. The Oort Cloud is a strange, ghostly place. It is not a cloud in any everyday sense. There are no dense swirls of matter. There is nothing that would look, to human eyes, like anything at all if you were floating in it. It is, instead, an enormous, roughly spherical shell of small, icy bodies orbiting the sun at unimaginable distances. Some of these bodies are the size of pebbles. Some are the size of mountains. All of them are cold beyond any human experience of cold. And they are so far apart from each other that if you were standing on one of them, you would not, in most cases, be able to see another one with the naked eye. You would just see stars. The Oort cloud is emptier than empty. It is the emptiness with a name, and its scale is one of those numbers that even astronomers, when they say it out loud, have to pause on. The Oort cloud is thought to begin somewhere around 2,000 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun, and to extend outward. Nobody is entirely sure how far, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun. Try to hold that. If the entire orbit of Neptune, the outer edge of the known planetary system, were the size of a small coin sitting on a table in front of you, then the outer edge of the Oort cloud would be more than half the length of a football field away from that same coin. That is what a solar system actually is, once you include all of it, not the tidy little cartoon of 8 planets on nested circles. A great, quiet, dark, cold, almost empty sphere, thousands of times larger than the neighborhood of the planets, extending nearly a quarter of the way to the nearest other star. And Voyager, in the long thousands after our signal ended, is finally, slowly, entering that sphere. It will not enter it quickly. It will not even, in any real sense, cross it in a single human lifetime. To pass through the entire Oort cloud at Voyager's current speed will take something on the order of 30,000 years. 30,000 years of drifting, quietly, through a region of the solar system almost nobody at NASA ever really talked about while the signal was still coming home, because the signal was going to fade long before Voyager ever got there. That entire chapter of the spacecraft's life, the tens of thousands of years it will spend inside its own solar system's outermost, coldest, most invisible layer, is a chapter that happens entirely in the silence, entirely alone, entirely unwitnessed. And in that silence out there in the Oort cloud, something small does begin to happen to the spacecraft. Not much, but something. Because even the almost empty Oort cloud is not perfectly empty. There is dust. There are the occasional icy grains drifting on their own long orbits. There are cosmic rays streaming through from farther away, the way they have been streaming through the whole time. Every so often, a grain of interstellar dust smaller than a speck of pollen strikes the spacecraft at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour. Each strike on its own does almost nothing. It leaves a microscopic crater, a pit smaller than a dust mote, nothing that would be visible to the naked eye. Nothing that would matter to anything larger than an atom. But over 10,000 years, and then 20,000, and then 30, the pits accumulate, slowly, painstakingly, one microscopic wound at a time. The outer surfaces of the spacecraft, the great white dish of the antenna, the golden foil wrapped around parts of the body, the smooth outer plating of the record itself, begin to acquire, over unimaginable time, a very faint, very slow roughening, a kind of cosmic weathering. The kind of weathering a stone might take from 100,000 years of gentle rain, on a world where the rain fell only once a century. It is not enough in 100,000 years to destroy anything on the spacecraft. It is not even close. Engineers have modeled this. The rate of erosion in interstellar space is so slow that the golden record on the side of the spacecraft, if nothing else happens to it, could survive for hundreds of millions of years, and possibly for billions before its grooves became unreadable. Some estimates put its useful life at more than 5 billion years. That is longer than the Earth itself has left. But even so, out here in the Oort cloud, the very first small kisses of that long erosion begin. The record out there starts to be very, very gently sanded by the universe. Grain by grain, micrometeoroid by micrometeoroid, so slowly that if you sped up time by a factor of 1 billion, you would still barely see anything happen. And still, all this time, humanity is doing whatever humanity is doing. 10,000 years of us, going on with our lives, forgetting almost everything we ever knew, remembering some of it in strange new forms, building things, breaking them, rebuilding them, arguing about what really matters and what does not. The name Voyager, in 10,000 years, may or may not still be a name that anyone alive on Earth remembers. The word NASA may or may not still exist. English may or may not still be a language anyone speaks. There may or may not still be an Earth in the sense that we know it. There may or may not still be anyone at all. And through all of that, whatever it is, whatever we become, whatever we lose, whatever we save out there, thousands of times the distance to Neptune, the small spacecraft drifts on, its aim still holding, its record still gold, its pits still accumulating one atom at a time. Sit with that image for a moment, because it is a strange, quiet, humbling one. There is something out there right now, a real object made by human hands, made of aluminum and gold and copper and plutonium and thin sheets of insulation. That is going to be. In 10,000 years, in a place we cannot fully imagine, still doing exactly what we told it to do, still holding the direction we last pointed it, still carrying the message we last put on it, and still, in some quiet part of what we are, ours. Even if we are not there, even if nothing that made it exists anymore. A small question before we go further. If you could send a small, unchanged, indestructible object 10,000 years into the future, knowing that whoever or whatever opened it might not be human, and might not know anything about you, and might not even recognize the language you spoke or the world you came from, what would you put inside it? Not a great treasure, not a summary of everything you ever thought, just one small thing, one image, one sentence, one small object from your life. What would you send forward out of your own century to whoever might be waiting on the other side of 10,000 years? Tell us in the comments. There is something quietly astonishing about a stranger describing to another stranger in the dark what they would place in their own small time capsule, because now we have to leave the Oort cloud behind. We have to lengthen our stride again and go somewhere so much further out in time that the numbers themselves start to feel almost mythological. We have to travel in a single quiet step from 10,000 years to 40,000. And when we do, something happens for the first time since Voyager left Earth. Something that has not happened in its entire long history of drifting. Something that, for a small moment in the depth of the future, changes everything about what this spacecraft is and where it is and what it means. Because up ahead, waiting patiently in a corner of the sky that most of us have never really looked at, is another star. And it and Voyager are moving toward each other. Not exactly toward each other, but close enough in cosmic terms to matter. And that is where we are going next. 40,000 years. Say that number out loud in your mind. Let it sit there. Because 40,000 years is not a number that human beings are really designed to hold. It is longer than every civilization that has ever existed, put end to end, and then some. It is 4 times the length of everything you would recognize as recorded history. It is nearly twice as long as the entire span of time since human beings first began painting animals on the walls of caves in what is now France and Spain. 40,000 years ago, the last ice age was still tightening its grip on the northern hemisphere. Mammoths still walked the plains of Europe. The people who would eventually become almost every ancestor of every reader tonight were living in small bands, hunting with stone-tipped spears, telling each other stories under skies with fewer artificial lights than any of us have ever seen. That was 40,000 years ago on Earth. That is what a span of 40,000 years does to us. And 40,000 years from now, if Voyager 1 is still holding its course, and there is very little in the physics of empty space that would nudge it off that course, something quiet and remarkable is going to happen out there in the dark. For the first time since the summer of 1977, when it lifted off a launch pad in Florida under a sky full of clouds, that spacecraft is going to have company. Not company in any way we would normally use the word. Not a rendezvous, not a landing. Not a meeting really in any human sense, but an encounter of a kind, a passing near. There is a small red star currently sitting about 17 light years from our sun, in a corner of the northern sky in the faint constellation of Camelopardalis, the giraffe. Nobody looks at it. It has no popular name. It is far too dim to see with the naked eye, even on the darkest, clearest night your part of the world has ever had. It is a red dwarf, roughly a third the mass of our sun, cool and quiet and long-lived. Its formal designation, the label astronomers use when they need to speak about it precisely, is Gliese 445, also known as AC plus 79, 3888, if you like your names in numbers. And this small red star right now at this exact moment is racing toward our sun, not slowly, not gently, at something like 100 kilometers every second relative to us. It is one of the fastest moving stars in our neighborhood, on a trajectory that is bringing it closer and closer to our system, year by year, century by century, millennium by millennium. It is doing something almost none of us ever really think about the stars doing. It is moving. It is coming. And in something like 40,000 years, at its closest approach, Gliese 445 will be about 3.5 light years from the sun. Closer, at that moment, than the entire Alpha Centauri system is to us today. Closer than Proxima Centauri, the nearest star to our Sun in this era. For a little while, in the very deep future, Gliese 445 will be the closest star to our Sun, not by our doing, not by anything anyone alive today or alive in 10,000 years will have arranged, just by the slow, patient, unstoppable geometry of stellar motion. And Voyager 1 having drifted for 40,000 years in almost exactly the direction that small red star is coming from, will happen through no plan, through no aim, through no design ever laid down by anyone at NASA, to be in the same very rough part of the sky at the same very rough moment. It was not sent there on purpose. The people who designed Voyager 1's trajectory were not trying to reach any star. They were trying to reach Jupiter and then Saturn, and then, using Saturn's gravity, they were trying to fling the spacecraft out of the solar system on a hard, high-angled path that would carry it up and away from the plane of the planets. That was the goal. Escape, not arrival. And yet, because the stars themselves move, because Gliese 445 is barreling in from one direction while Voyager 1 is drifting patiently in almost the same direction, the two of them will find each other, if you can call it finding, in the depths of the far future. When they pass, Voyager 1 will be about 1.5 light years from Gliese 445. Some careful modeling puts the number a little wider, some a little tighter, but roughly 1.5 light in all the estimates. And here is the small, quietly staggering thing about that number. 1.5 light is very far by the standards of a solar system. It is roughly 9 trillion kilometers. Enough space that if you were floating beside Voyager and looking out into the sky, Gliese 445 would still just be a star, a little brighter than any nearby star Voyager will have seen since leaving the Sun. Not a disk, not a face. Just a slightly brighter point of light in a dark sky. You could hold up your thumb at arm's length and cover it easily. And yet, at that moment, that small red star will be closer to Voyager 1 than the Sun will be. Closer. Our Sun, our star, the one we grew up under, the one every plant on Earth reached for, the one that gave us all our warmth and light and reason to have eyes, will be, from Voyager's point of view, farther away than a different star. There will be, out there at that moment, a spacecraft made by human hands, drifting in the space between two suns, and the closer of those suns will not be ours. It will be a stranger's. It will be Gliese 445, small and red and quietly luminous, holding the position of nearest star to a small silver object that once belonged to the third planet of a completely different system. That is not a poetic image. That is the plain arithmetic of the encounter. That is the actual, measurable geometry that will unfold, according to everything we currently understand about how stars move. And here is where you have to sit still and let the strangeness of it work on you. Because most of us, when we hear the word close in the context of stars, do not really know what we mean. We think about close the way we think about close on Earth. Close is the town next door. Close is the person across the room. Close is a distance you could cover if you had to on foot. But close, in the language of the galaxy, is a completely different word. Close is 1.5 light years. Close is 9 trillion kilometers. Close is a distance so vast that a beam of light would need 1.5 years to cross it. Close, in interstellar terms, is what would look on any human map like an absurd, indifferent, unbridgeable emptiness. And yet at that moment, in that quiet future, it will be the closest Voyager 1 has come to anything since it left home. It will be, by every honest definition, an encounter. Voyager 2, meanwhile, is doing something almost identical but with a different star. Because Voyager 2, having left the Earth on a slightly different trajectory, and having taken its long meandering path through the planets, past Jupiter, past Saturn, past Uranus, past Neptune, in the only spacecraft encounters those last 2 ice giants have ever received, is drifting toward a different corner of the sky. And in about 40,000 years, its own quiet appointment lies with a star called Ross 248. Ross 248 is another small red dwarf, currently about 10 light years from the Sun, and it too is moving. In roughly 40,000 years, Ross 248 will pass within about a light and 7/10 of Voyager 2. Not too different in shape or in scale from what Voyager 1 will be doing with Gliese 445. 2 spacecraft, 2 small red stars, 2 impossibly patient encounters in the deep future. And in both cases, at the moment of closest approach, the small red star will be closer to the spacecraft than our own sun will be. 2 suns, 2 farewells of a kind. 2 moments 40,000 years from now, when the machines we launched on the 4th of July weekend of 1977 will finally, in a very quiet, very technical sense, be no longer near the star of their birth. Sit with that. Because this is one of the moments in this story where you have to remember that the spacecraft does not know. Voyager will not experience its encounter with Gliese 445. It will not notice it. It will not feel it. There will be no light on the console that lights up, because there is no console and there is no one to read it. There will be no shift in the trajectory, because the spacecraft is passing so far from the star that the star's gravity at that distance will do essentially nothing to it. There will be no photograph taken, because the cameras were shut off decades before the signal ever ended, and even if by some impossibility they had still been on, there would have been no one on Earth to receive the images. The encounter will happen entirely in silence, entirely in dark, entirely without witness. And that is the strange, quietly beautiful thing about the encounter. It happens whether or not anyone is watching. It happens whether or not humanity still exists. It happens whether or not anyone remembers the name Voyager, or the name Gliese 445, or the name Earth. It happens because 2 objects, moving at their own private speeds in their own private directions, arrive by the accident of their own separate motions at the same rough part of the sky. That is all. No one has arranged it. No one is present for it. It is a small, private meeting between 2 objects in the dark. It is, in a way that human beings almost never get to see, an event without an audience. And here is what tugs at the heart if you let it. Voyager will keep going. It will pass Gliese 445 at its indifferent distance, and it will keep drifting. 50,000 years from now, it will be somewhere else. 100,000 years from now, it will be somewhere else again. The spacecraft in the very long run does not settle. It does not arrive. It does not stop. It does not, in the plain sense of the word, get anywhere. It just keeps moving. Astronomers have looked ahead at the far future of these spacecraft, and the general picture is that Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, over the course of many hundreds of thousands, and eventually millions of years, will drift through the galaxy in something like the same way that our own sun does. They will make roughly the same statistical number of close passes to other stars as a random point in the solar neighborhood would. Every few 100,000 years on average, they will find themselves within a light year or two of some star, most of them small, most of them quiet, most of them anonymous by any name we would ever have given them. There will be no plan. There will be no destination. There will only be the long, slow tumbling of two small objects through the great, slow tumbling of the Milky Way. And every one of those encounters, every quiet passage, will happen exactly the same way as the one with Gliese 445. In silence, in darkness, without witness, without ceremony. A cold thing drifting past a warm thing, and neither of them noticing. Take a breath for a moment, because this is one of those thoughts, if you let it be, that changes the way you look at what close means. All your life you have used the word close for things you can touch, for people you can call, for places you can drive to, for the neighbor next door. Close, on the human scale, is a word that means something you can reach without much effort. It is a word about accessibility, about availability, about being able to feel someone's presence. But out there, in the language of the galaxy, close is a different word entirely. Close is a distance you could not cross in 100,000 human lifetimes. Close is a gap so wide that light takes a year and a half to bridge it. Close is what the universe calls a good friendship, on its own scale, and even that friendship happens with 9 trillion kilometers of empty space in between, which raises a small, tender question. When you think about the people in your own life who feel close to you, really, deeply, in the bones close, what do you mean by that word? Is it a matter of physical distance? Or is it something else entirely? Something more like being on almost the same trajectory, through almost the same stretch of time, for a small, precious, overlapping little moment. What has made the closest people in your life feel close, even when they have not been near you in any physical sense? And what would it mean, honestly, for you to think of closeness the way the galaxy thinks of it, not as touching, but as passing quietly within some enormous but shared distance, for some small stretch of shared time? Tell us, if you want, in the comments. There is something almost aching about a stranger describing what makes closeness real to them, to another stranger in the dark. Because now that we have watched Voyager pass its first star, and its second, in silence, we have to turn to the small object still bolted to the side of that machine. The small, gold-plated 12-inch disc engraved with sounds and images and greetings, that has been waiting quietly in the dark since 1977. Because the truth is, none of these encounters were ever meant to matter for the spacecraft. They were meant to matter for the record. For the small message our species tied to the side of a bottle and threw into the sea between the stars. And to understand what that message actually is, and how long it will last and what it might outlive, we have to look very carefully at what is engraved on that disc, and at the strange little clock built into its cover, and at the deep time it is designed to survive. That is where we are going next. Bolted to the outside of each Voyager, on a flat part of the spacecraft's body where you could easily reach it if you were floating beside it in the dark, there is a small, circular object about the size of a dinner plate, 12 inches across, a little more than 30 centimeters. It is covered by an aluminum jacket, plain and industrial looking, engraved with a series of quiet diagrams. And beneath that jacket, held gently against the vacuum, is a disc of gold-plated copper, a thin record engraved with the sounds and images and greetings of a species that, when it made it, had only just begun to leave its own planet. You have almost certainly seen a picture of it. You have probably heard it described a dozen times. You may have skimmed past it, the way you skim past a familiar photograph on a museum wall, thinking, yes, the golden record, the message to aliens, the Carl Sagan project. But tonight, in the middle of a story about deep time, we have to slow down and look at it properly. Because the golden record is not really what most people think it is. The golden record is not, in the deepest sense, a message to aliens. It is something quieter and stranger and much more staggering than that. Let us begin with what is actually on it. The record contains 115 images, encoded in analog, that can be reconstructed by anyone who understands the diagrams on the cover. Photographs of a mother nursing a child, of the DNA molecule, of a fetus in a womb, of a family portrait, of a busy street in an ordinary city, of a leaf, of a wave, of a mountain, of an anatomical diagram of the human body, ordinary images. Small, particular things, not glory shots of the greatest human achievements, not the pyramids and the moon landings, at least not primarily. Mostly, quietly, a curated album of what it actually looks like to be alive on a small blue planet in the third orbit of a small yellow star. It contains greetings, spoken by real human voices, in 55 different languages. Some of those languages, at the time the record was made, were already ancient. Akkadian, which had not been spoken as a daily language for more than 2,000 years, is on there. So is a greeting in Wu Chinese. So are greetings in Hittite, in Sumerian, in Nguni, in Nyanja, in languages you have almost certainly never heard, spoken by people whose names most of us will never learn. There is a small girl saying hello in one of them. There is an old man in another. There are ordinary human voices, some nervous, some warm, some laughing a little at the strangeness of what they are being asked to do, all of them saying, in effect, we are here. We are alive. We greet you. It contains a 12-minute montage of sounds from Earth, the sounds of a heartbeat, the sounds of a mother speaking softly to her baby, the sounds of wind and rain and thunder and surf, the sounds of a chimpanzee, of frogs, of whales singing across the deep waters of the Pacific in a language we still do not fully understand, the sounds of a horse, of a truck, of a train, of a rocket taking off, of a kiss. There is on that record the actual sound of one human being kissing another human being, encoded into gold, drifting through interstellar space. And it contains 90 minutes of music. 3/4 of the record is music. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart in a piece from the magic flute, a Navajo night chant, a pygmy girl's initiation song from Zaire, a Peruvian wedding song. Blind Willie Johnson, playing a piece so aching and slow that some of the people who selected it said at the time that they hoped whoever found the record would understand from that one song alone that we were a species capable of loneliness. There is Chuck Berry playing Johnny Be Good, because the team was determined not to leave rock and roll out of the human story. There is a Bulgarian folk song, sung by a woman named Valia Balkanska, whose voice on that recording is so strange and so powerful that the first time you hear it, you are not sure whether it is human or something else. All of it. All of it on one small disc, drifting in the dark. And on top of all of that, there is one recording, tucked quietly into the record, that most people do not know is there. Ann Druyan, who was the creative director of the project, and who would later marry Carl Sagan, and who is, in some deep sense, the reason the record has the emotional shape it does, agreed in the weeks before the record was pressed to have her own brainwaves recorded. Just an hour of them. While she thought, in a controlled and quiet way, about the history of Earth and about the ideas of the great thinkers who had shaped human civilization, and toward the end of the session, about the fact that she had, in that week, just fallen in love with Carl Sagan. And that hour of her brainwaves, that private, unspoken, unvisualizable neurological signature of a woman thinking and remembering and loving, was compressed into a short segment on the record and encoded into gold. And it is out there right now twice, once on Voyager 1, once on Voyager 2, drifting through interstellar space. The thoughts of a person who was, in the moment of recording, quietly and privately in love. Sit with that for a second. Because that is one of the strangest, most human things any species has ever done. We attached to a machine we were about to throw at the stars, a recording of a person thinking about being in love with another person. Not a summary, not a metaphor. The actual neurological pattern. And we sent it without asking permission into the dark forever. That is what the golden record actually is. Not a glossy brochure, not a scientific abstract, not a well-organized summary of everything humanity has ever done. It is closer to a very small, very carefully assembled love letter from a young species that had only just begun to understand its own smallness, to a universe that had not asked for it. And it is bolted to the side of the spacecraft we have been following tonight. Now, here is the part that makes all of this deeper than it already is. Here is the part that turns the record from a beautiful gesture into something almost mythological. Because the record was not just made, it was engineered, and it was engineered to last. The core of it is a thin disk of copper, chosen because copper does not deform under the conditions of vacuum and cold that the spacecraft would spend its life in. That core is plated in gold, chosen because gold is one of the most stable, most unreactive materials known to human chemistry. Gold does not tarnish. Gold does not oxidize. Gold does not react with almost anything, given the conditions it will spend its life in. The gold seals the copper against the outside universe like a very thin, very patient armor. Over the record sits the aluminum jacket, engraved with the diagrams that show, in the simplest way the team could think of, how to open the cover, how to place the stylus, how to spin the record at the right speed. There is a small ceramic cartridge and a stylus included on the spacecraft, so that whoever or whatever opens the cover has the physical tools to play the recording. And on the cover, in a small, almost easy-to-miss patch, the team electroplated a sample of uranium-238. Uranium-238 is a radioactive isotope, not a dangerous one, at the small quantity that is on the record. NASA has given its radioactivity as about 1/4 of a millionth of a curie, a laboratory-safe amount, small enough that you could hold it in your hand without any harm. But uranium-238 has one very particular property that made it exactly the right thing to place on the cover of the record. Its half-life is roughly 4.5 billion years, roughly the age of the Earth, roughly the remaining lifespan of our Sun. That means that if you measure how much of that uranium has decayed compared to the original amount, you can calculate with great precision how long ago the record was made. It is a clock. A slow, patient, unstoppable clock, ticking off billions of years, built into the very jacket of the record. Whoever or whatever finds this record, if anyone ever does, will not need to guess how old it is. They will be able to look at the uranium patch, measure the decay, and know, this much time has passed since the humans made this. This much of their world has aged out from under them. The uranium is not a warning. It is not a weapon. It is not a message. It is a date stamp, written in the only language that stays legible for cosmic time. And here is what makes the number all the more staggering. Because engineers, in the years since the record was made, have modeled its physical survival in interstellar space. Given the density of the dust, given the rate of micrometeoroid impacts, given the cosmic ray flux, given everything we know about the environment Voyager will spend its long drift in, how long, really, will the record last? How long will the groove stay readable? How long will the gold stay smooth? How long will the images and the sounds and the greetings and the brain waves and the Bulgarian folk song and the whale song and the blind Willie Johnson stay physically recoverable if someone knew where to look? The estimates vary. The estimates are not certainties. They are honest scientific estimates with wide error bars, because nobody has ever built a machine designed to last this long before, and nobody has ever really been able to test one at these time scales. But the numbers that come back are almost impossible to say without pausing. The record is expected to remain intact, at least partially, for a span of at least 1 billion years. Some estimates, when the analysis is pushed further, put it at closer to 5 billion years. Longer than the Earth itself has left, longer than our own sun will remain in any recognizable form as a star. Say that again in your head, slowly. There is an object right now, in the outer solar system, made of copper and gold and aluminum and one small patch of decaying uranium, that is very likely going to outlast the world on which it was made. Everything you have ever loved on Earth will be gone before that record is unreadable. Every human being who has ever lived, and every human being who will ever live, and every human being whose descendants may or may not still exist to remember any of us, every one of them gone before that gold has been worn smooth. The languages the greetings are spoken in will have been dead for so long that even the idea of them being languages will have been forgotten. The music will be from a species nobody remembers. The images of the leaf and the wave and the mother and the child will be images from a planet that, by then, will either have been swallowed by its own dying sun, or will have been so utterly transformed that nothing will remain to recognize itself in the pictures. And still the record will be there, still gold, still legible, still turning faintly in the dark in a place with no ears left to hear it. That is not a thought that human beings are built to hold easily. It is the kind of thought that, if you let it in all the way, can rearrange the furniture in your head for a little while. Because most of what we do, most of what we build, most of what we love is built with the quiet, unspoken assumption that there is someone on the other side of it. Someone to read the book, someone to remember the story, someone to inherit the house, someone to visit the grave. That is why we do the things we do. That is why we care about legacy. That is why we build monuments. Because we imagine, in some hopeful part of us, a future in which someone stands in front of what we made and understands and remembers and belongs to it and to us. The golden record is a monument built on the opposite assumption. It is a monument built with a very quiet, very brave suspicion that the ones who made it may not be there when it is opened, that the audience it was designed for may never come, that the entire species that wrote the letter may be so long gone by the time someone reads it that even the name of the species will have been forgotten. And it was made anyway. It was made with love and with care, and with a level of engineering rigor that borders on the reverent. It was made by people who did not expect to be around to see it succeed, and who did it anyway because the making of it was, in itself, an act of hope, not confidence. Hope. Hope so quiet and so patient that it can outlast the world. Take a breath for a moment, and a small question, if you are still with us. If you had to make your own record, one small, indestructible object engraved with what you would want a stranger 1 billion years from now to know about you, or about the people you love, or about the world you actually lived in, what would you put on it? Not the summary, not the highlight reel, just the small, honest, particular things, the one voice, the one image, the one small sound that would, if nothing else survived, say something true about what it was like to be here. Tell us in the comments if you feel like it. There is something quietly extraordinary about hearing what strangers would send forward into a billion years to any listener who might one day come. Because now we have to do something even harder than what we have done so far. We have to sit with the truth that the record is very likely, on any honest reading of the numbers, going to outlast the Earth itself. That is not a metaphor. That is not a poetic flourish. That is the plain arithmetic of two objects, a small planet warmed by a middle-aged star, and a small disk floating far from any star at all, placed side by side on a timeline stretching billions of years into the future. One of them ends first. And it is not the one you would guess. We have to walk out to that ending next. We have to watch gently from a safe cosmic distance what happens to the world that made Voyager, long after Voyager has left it behind. To go where we are going next, we have to leave the spacecraft alone for a little while. We have to take our eyes off the small silver machine drifting through the dark and turn them gently back toward the world it came from, toward Earth, toward the sun, toward the star we grew up under. Because to understand what the golden record actually is, to understand the full weight of what we bolted to the side of that spacecraft in 1977, we have to look at what is going to happen to our own solar system in the long stretches of time the record is designed to survive. And what is going to happen to our solar system is not something most of us think about very often. It is not something most of us really want to think about. But it is real and it is coming, and it is a story with a beginning and a middle and an end, just like any other story. And Voyager, drifting quietly out in interstellar space, will be alive for all of it. Let us begin gently. Let us begin with the sun. Our sun is, right now, roughly halfway through its life as a stable, steady, well-behaved star. It has been shining, more or less as it does today, for about 4.5 billion years. It has powered every sunrise that has ever happened on Earth. It has warmed every ocean. It has evaporated every raindrop. It has grown every leaf. It is the reason there is such a thing as your voice and your eyes and this moment and every moment before it. Everything you know, everything you have ever loved, everything that has ever mattered on this planet has happened under the warm, steady presence of this one middle-aged star. But stars do not stay steady forever. Stars have lives in the same way that people have lives, only spread across timescales so long that human beings do not really have a way to feel them. And the sun, in its own quiet way, is aging. Every second, deep in its core, it fuses hydrogen into helium, and every second that helium accumulates. Every second its inner structure shifts just slightly. Every second the sun becomes, imperceptibly, hotter and brighter and larger than it was the second before. The change is so slow that no one on Earth will ever notice it in a lifetime, or in 1,000 lifetimes, or in 1,000,000. But it is happening. It has been happening the whole time you have been alive. It has been happening the whole time your species has existed. And it will keep happening for billions of years until, eventually, everything changes. In roughly 1 billion years, if nothing else intervenes, The sun will have grown bright enough that Earth will begin to lose its oceans. Not in a moment, not in a decade. Slowly, over vast stretches of time, in a runaway greenhouse process that will boil the seas into the sky and strip the water off the surface of the planet. By then, whatever remains of anything you would recognize as Earth will be very different from the world you know. The continents may still be there, but the blue that made your planet look like a marble from space will have burned away. That happens in roughly 1 billion years. In roughly 5 billion years, the sun will do something more dramatic. It will begin to swell. Not gently, not slowly. On the scale of stellar timescales, it will begin to expand very quickly. The hydrogen in its core will run out, and the core will contract, and the outer layers of the star will bloat outward in a great, slow, deep red inhalation. The sun will become a red giant. It will grow so large that its outer edges will reach past the orbit of Mercury, and then Venus. And then, in almost every model that anyone has ever run of what our sun's future looks like, it will reach the Earth. It will swallow us. There is a small, quiet chance that Earth, at the last moment, escapes. As the sun loses mass, and it will lose a great deal of mass in this phase of its life, its gravitational hold on the planets will weaken, and their orbits will drift outward. Some models suggest Earth might drift far enough to survive being engulfed. Others suggest it will not. But even in the models where the physical planet is not directly consumed, everything on it, and everything that was ever on it, will have been long since sterilized. The oceans will be gone. The atmosphere will be gone. Any structure on the surface, any piece of steel, any scrap of concrete, any single stone that anyone ever set on top of another stone in an act of building, all of it gone. There will be no Great Wall of China. There will be no Sphinx. There will be no city underneath your feet. There will be a cinder, a rocky, drifting cinder if it survives at all, tumbling around the shrunken, glowing corpse of the sun. And on any time scale that matters, that is the end of Earth, not the end of matter exactly, not the end of atoms, but the end of Earth as a place, the end of Earth as a home, the end of Earth as the third planet from the sun, the small blue-white pale dot that Voyager 1 photographed in 1990 when its cameras were still on its way out. The end of the world we mean when we say the word world. Now hold that in your mind for a moment and come back gently to the spacecraft. Because in 5 billion years, when the sun swells and swallows the inner planets, and the Earth either burns or drifts outward as a sterilized rock, Voyager will still be out there, not near. Not anywhere within reach of the dying star, very, very far, somewhere in the wider galaxy, having drifted by then for something like 5 billion years since the last signal faded, long past Gliese 445, long past Ross 248, long past any encounter we can currently name. It will have passed near in the loose statistical sense of near that the galaxy uses, some indeterminate number of small anonymous stars. It will have kept its aim. It will have kept its shape. And it will still, bolted to its side, carry that small gold-plated disk. The sun at that moment in the deep future will not be a sun anymore. It will be a small, dim, white dwarf, no larger than the Earth used to be, sitting at the center of what used to be a solar system. Cold, quiet, fading. Its planets, or what is left of them, will be scattered on wider and wider orbits, drifting outward, cooling down, becoming, over long stretches of time, indistinguishable from the general rubble of interstellar debris. There will still be a place in the sky from Voyager's perspective that used to be home, but it will not look like home anymore. It will not look like anything, really. Just another faint point of light, and not even a very bright one. Voyager at that moment will still be Voyager. The record will still be gold. The images of the leaf and the wave and the mother and the child will still be encoded in its grooves. The greetings in 55 languages will still be there. Ann Druyon's brainwaves thinking about being in love will still be there. Blind Willie Johnson's slow, aching song will still be there. All of it, perfectly preserved, still readable, still in every physical sense alive. And the world that made it will be gone. There is no way to say that sentence gently. There is no way to make it small. It is one of the strangest and most staggering thoughts in the whole story of what human beings have ever done. We took a small, gold-plated record and we sent it into interstellar space, and by the sheer arithmetic of engineering and cosmology, the record is very likely going to outlast the planet that made it. Not the species, the planet. The rock we were born on, the oceans we came from, the soil that grew every plant that fed every ancestor of every reader tonight. All of it will be gone in the ordinary sense before that small disk has been rubbed smooth by the passing of interstellar dust. Now here is the part of this thought that most people do not sit with. But that has to be sat with tonight, because there is something quietly revolutionary hidden inside it, something that changes the shape of what a monument is, something that changes the shape of what remembering means. Almost everything humans have ever built, we have built with the assumption that the earth would be there to hold it. Every temple, every library, every gravestone, every book, every home, every letter you have ever received in the mail. All of it made with the quiet, unspoken faith that the ground under it would remain, and that someone, someday, would come along and read it, and know that we had been here. The idea that a piece of you might outlast the planet you lived on, that idea is almost never on our minds. It is not the kind of thing our species is built to think about. We plan for grandchildren. We plan for great-grandchildren. We do not usually plan for a time in which the world we knew has stopped existing. The golden record, whether the people who made it fully realized it or not, is a monument that quietly does. It is a monument that outlives its own planet. It is a small piece of us, deliberately placed so far outside the neighborhood of our own extinction that even the death of the sun will not touch it. And it is not a boast. It is not, if you look at it closely, an act of pride. It is something more like a very small, very careful act of humility. It is our species saying, in engineering language, we know this is not going to last here. We know the earth will end. We know we will end. But maybe, just maybe, One small piece of what we were can drift somewhere the ending cannot reach. Not because we deserve to be remembered, just because we would like, if the universe will allow it to have been. That is what is bolted to the side of that spacecraft. That is what has been drifting quietly since 1977. Not an ambassador, not an emissary, not even really a message. A very small piece of a species that knew it was going to end, thrown far enough into the future that the ending itself will not touch it. Sit with that for a moment. Let it settle, because it does not settle quickly. There is a strange kind of comfort in it if you let it in, not a warm comfort, not a comfort that makes anything easier, a cold, wide comfort. The kind of comfort you sometimes find when you stand outside on a very clear winter night and look up at a sky full of stars and understand that whatever is happening in your life right now, however heavy or complicated or exhausting it is not the whole story of the universe, that there are quiet, patient things going on scales so far beyond you that they cannot be affected by anything you have ever worried about. The golden record is part of that quiet, patient story now. It is not affected by anything we are doing tonight. It will not be affected by anything anyone does tomorrow. It is simply out there, drifting, gold and silent and safely too far away to hurt anyone or be hurt by anything. A small question before we move on. If you knew, really knew in your bones, that something small of yours would outlast not just you, and not just your family, and not just your country, but the entire planet you were born on, and the entire star that warmed it, what would you want that small thing to be? Not the thing you would boast about, not the impressive thing, the honest thing. The thing you would be quietly, privately proud of, if you understood that it was the piece of you that would survive when everything else was gone. Sit with that question for a moment. And if you feel like it, tell us in the comments what that small, honest thing would be. There is something very quietly moving about a stranger describing to another stranger, in the dark, what part of themselves they hope will drift furthest into the future. Because now, having watched the earth end, having watched the sun swell into a red giant and then shrink into a cooling white dwarf, we have to go even further. We have to travel to a moment in the deep future that most people, if they have heard of it at all, know as a rumor. A moment when our entire galaxy stops being what it is and becomes something new. A slow, silent, immense collision, not the kind that makes noise, not the kind you would see any single frame of if you were floating in it, but the kind that reshapes the sky itself. And out beyond every one of those changes, still the spacecraft, still the record, still the small, cold, indifferent drift of a message that will not stop being a message just because there is no one left to hear it. That is where we are going next. To go where we are going now, we have to lift our eyes off the small spacecraft, and even off the dying star it once orbited, and look up at something so much larger than either of them that the mind for a moment does not quite know how to hold it. We have to look up at the galaxy itself, at the Milky Way, at the great, slow, glittering wheel of stars that our sun is one very small member of, and that Voyager, no matter how far it drifts, will still be part of for a very long time to come. You have seen the Milky Way, or at least you have seen part of it. On a clear, dark night, far from the lights of any city, if you look up at the right time of year, you can see a soft, pale band of light stretching across the sky, from horizon to horizon. That band is what our galaxy looks like from inside. You are looking at it edge-on, from a position embedded within its disk, about 2/3 of the way out from the center. Everything you can see with your naked eye at night, every star, every twinkle, every faint smear of light, with a very small number of exceptions, is inside that galaxy. The Milky Way is our home in the deepest possible sense. Not our house, not our country, not our planet, our neighborhood in the universe. It contains, by most current estimates, somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars. The number is not precisely known because you cannot easily count something that large from the inside. There are stars behind stars, stars behind clouds of dust, stars so faint that even our best instruments miss them. But somewhere in that range, hundreds of billions of them of every color and every age and every size. And the galaxy is not still. The galaxy is moving, rotating slowly once every couple of 100 million years or so in a great patient wheel. And every star inside it, our sun included, is riding around with it on its own small orbit around the center. Everything moves, everything drifts, everything is in motion all the time. It is only that the motions are so slow and the distances so vast that from where we sit on the surface of our small, warm world, the whole thing looks utterly, immovably still. But it is not still. Right now, at this very moment, our galaxy is on a collision course with another one. The neighbor is called Andromeda. If you have ever heard the name in a science documentary or seen it in a photograph, this is what it refers to. Andromeda is a spiral galaxy very much like our own, only a little larger, containing something like 1 trillion stars. It sits, right now, about 2.5 million light-years away from us, in the direction of the constellation of the same name. That is roughly the most distant thing you can see with your unaided eye on Earth. If you know where to look on a clear autumn night in the northern hemisphere, you can find a small, faint, oval smudge in the sky. That smudge is another galaxy. That smudge is Andromeda. And every photon of light coming from it left its stars more than 2 million years ago, before your species had learned to write, before we had built a single city, before the first small band of upright apes had ever thought to draw an animal on a cave wall. And Andromeda is falling toward us, not drifting sideways, falling straight in, at something like 100 kilometers every second, closing the gap between us. Every year, the two of us are a little closer than the year before, every century closer still. And in something like 4.5 billion years from now, right around the same time our sun begins to swell into its red giant phase, the two galaxies will meet. The word collide is not quite right. It is close, and it is the word most people use, but it is not quite right. Because when two galaxies collide, almost none of the stars in them actually hit each other. The distances between stars are so great, and the stars themselves so small compared to the space between them, that the odds of any two individual stars physically striking each other during the encounter are, on any honest calculation, essentially zero. You could pass one galaxy through another for 100 million years and in most cases not have a single direct stellar collision. What happens instead is much stranger and much slower and much more beautiful. The two galaxies pass through each other. Their gravitational fields pull on each other. Their stars get flung onto new orbits, tugged out of their old paths and drawn into new ones by the gravity of stars they never used to feel. Whole spiral arms get stretched into long, curving streamers, thousands of light years long, drifting through space like the trails of very slow smoke. The two galaxies swing past each other, then swing back, then merge into one over the course of hundreds of millions of years. The final result in most simulations is a single, larger elliptical galaxy, smoother, less spiral, more diffuse. Sometimes astronomers already jokingly call the future combined galaxy Milkomeda, because human beings are apparently incapable of not naming things. But here is the small, quiet, staggering fact that changes the whole feeling of it. Because at the same time, our galaxy is being pulled into Andromeda, our sun, assuming it has not already died. Though at this point in the story it very nearly has, it will be somewhere on a specific orbit around the center of the Milky Way, and that orbit will be perturbed. Not necessarily destroyed, not necessarily catapulted out into intergalactic space, just perturbed, nudged, placed on a new path. And every other star in the galaxy will be doing the same thing. The whole sky, for anyone who is still around to see it, will be quietly rearranged. The constellations you can name from your own back garden, Orion, Cassiopeia, the Big Dipper, the Southern Cross, will not exist anymore in that far future. They will have unraveled long before, actually, because the stars in them are already drifting on the ordinary scale of galactic motion. But by the time Andromeda arrives, whatever sky is left will not look, in any way, like the sky you have ever known. And through all of that, out somewhere in the wider dark, drifting on its own private orbit through a galaxy that is being reshuffled around it, Voyager will still be Voyager. It will not be near any of the action. It will not be swept up in any of the collisions, because there are almost no collisions to be swept up in. It will simply continue drifting at its steady 17 kilometers per second on the trajectory it was given long ago. Some models suggest that during the merger, Voyager, along with our sun and everything else that used to be in our neighborhood, might be flung out into a wider, more distant orbit around the new combined galaxy. Others suggest it might stay closer in. Nobody, honestly, can predict with precision where a specific small object will end up in a gravitational reshuffling that vast. But wherever it goes intact. It goes with its aim mostly held. It goes with its record still bolted to its side. It goes with the sound of whales and the greetings in 55 languages and the brain waves of a woman in love, all still there, still gold, still turning slowly in the dark. Try to feel the scale of that for a moment. Because most of us, when we imagine deep time, Imagine it happening to things, to buildings, to civilizations, to species. We do not usually imagine it happening to the sky. We do not imagine the constellations coming apart. We do not imagine another galaxy pouring into our own. We do not imagine our own home galaxy ceasing to exist as a spiral and becoming something else, something wider, something softer, something that no one now alive would recognize as the Milky Way. And we do not imagine a small, cold, human-made object drifting through all of it, untouched, still doing what it was always doing. Astronomers have looked at these long timescales, and they have run the numbers on what will happen to the Voyagers as the galaxy itself is transformed. The picture that emerges is oddly consistent. The Voyagers are very likely to survive intact for at least 5 billion years. Very likely, in fact, to remain at least partially intact as physical objects for far longer than that. Some estimates, if you follow them out into the trillions of years, suggest that these spacecraft, unless something extraordinary happens to them, will continue to exist as coherent objects for spans of time so long that the ordinary vocabulary of years and centuries loses its meaning. Long after every star that is currently shining in our galaxy has burned out, long after the last white dwarf has cooled to black, long into what physicists sometimes call the era of degenerate matter, when the universe itself has become so old that the light has gone almost everywhere out of it, and the statistical odds of any of the Voyagers being found by anyone ever during any of this are, to be honest, essentially zero. They are not exactly zero. The universe is very large and time is very long, and the smallest chances, given enough opportunity, can sometimes come true. But nobody who has looked seriously at the numbers thinks that Voyager, in its long drift, is likely to be intercepted. The stars are too far apart. The galaxies are too empty. Even in the wildest merger of two galaxies, the amount of physically occupied space is a vanishingly small fraction of the total volume involved. Voyager is far more likely to drift for tens of billions of years without ever coming close to anything at all than it is to have any encounter with any intelligent thing, or with anything at all that would change its story. Which means, in some plain, unglamorous mathematical sense, that this is really the shape of it. This is really what happens. Voyager drifts, the galaxy rearranges, Andromeda folds into the Milky Way, our sun cools and darkens, our Earth burns or drifts as a cinder. Nothing intelligent, in all statistical likelihood, ever comes to find the record. Nothing plays it. Nothing hears the whale song or reads the diagrams or measures the uranium clock. The message is delivered to no one. The letter reaches no addressee, and the spacecraft keeps going anyway. Take a breath for a moment if you need one. Because that is the point in this story where a lot of people, when they really let themselves understand it, want to look away. It is a big, cold thought. It is the kind of thought that, on a first pass, can feel like nihilism. What was the point then? What was the point of the record if no one hears it? What was the point of the whole thing if the audience never arrives? But sit with that a little longer and something changes. Because the truth is, the record was never really about being heard, and the mission was never really about being remembered, and the spacecraft was never really about arriving anywhere. The people who built Voyager and the people who assembled the record knew, on some quiet level, all of what we have just talked about. They knew the odds. They knew the timescales. They knew, somewhere in the honest parts of their scientific minds, that this was almost certainly not going to be found by anyone. And they made the record anyway. They pressed the gold anyway. They engraved the diagrams anyway. They recorded the greetings and the music and the brain waves and the whale songs anyway. Not because they expected to be heard, because they wanted to have said something, because they wanted, in some small, defiant, generous way, to have added a voice to the universe. Even if nothing was listening, even if nothing ever would, there is something in that which I think is one of the most quietly beautiful things our species has ever done, not in the sense of being clever, in the sense of being honest, of doing something that had almost no chance of being noticed, and doing it anyway, and doing it well, and doing it with love, not because it would work, because it was the right thing to do with the small stretch of time we had. You already know what that is like in your own small way. Everyone does. You have, at some point in your life, done something kind that no one saw, said a small true thing to someone who did not really need to hear it, but that you needed to say. Made something beautiful that no one has ever noticed. Sung quietly to yourself in a room with no one else in it. Tended in some small way to a place or a person or a moment that will never be remembered by anyone but you. That is what the golden record is on the largest possible scale. Not a message, a quiet, honest, private act of care released into a universe that will almost certainly never notice. A small question then before we take our last step. Have you ever done something kind or beautiful or true that no one else knew about? Something you did not do for an audience. Something you did not do for a reward. Something you did purely because it felt right to do, and because it was the small good thing that was available to you in that moment. Sit with that memory for a second, and if you feel like it, tell us in the comments what that small, quiet thing was. There is something almost aching about hearing what strangers have done in private when no one was watching. And it is, in a way, the closest we can get to understanding what our species was really doing when it engineered that small gold disc in the late 1970s and screwed it to the side of a machine that was about to leave the world. Because now, having sat with the whole vast shape of it, the fading signal, the slow silence, the drift through the Oort cloud, the encounter with Gliese 445, the death of the sun, the collision with Andromeda, the deep quiet of a message that will almost certainly not be found. We have one last step to take together tonight. We have to turn, gently, back to the question we started with. The strange, small, almost unanswerable question about what actually happens to Voyager after we stop listening. And we have to see how, in the light of everything we have walked through, that question changes, how it dissolves, how it becomes not a question with an answer, but something quieter and stranger, something more like an invitation. That is where we are going in the last part of the night. Come with us for one more step. So here we are at the last quiet stretch of the night. Let us walk slowly through it. There is no hurry left. Remember the image we started with. That small silver machine drifting patiently through the dark, still tethered by a thin thread of radio to a room full of engineers on Earth. Still ours, still listening, still in some small way coming home to us every day. That is where we began. That is the image most people have carried in their heads in some quiet corner for most of their lives. It is a comforting image. It is a companionable one. It is not wrong exactly. It is only the very first sentence of a story we have now spent almost 2 hours walking further into. And look at where the walk has brought us. We began at a whisper, 23 watts wide, arriving on a dish in a quiet Australian valley, so faint by the time it got here that it was 20 billion times weaker than what you would need to run a wristwatch. We walked from there to the 4 watts a year that fall out of the plutonium heart of the spacecraft, and to the small, sad, careful shutdowns that have been happening for years. We stood in the room in our imagination on the day the last science instrument goes off, and on the day the transmitter finally becomes too weak for any ear on Earth to catch. We watched the mission end, not with a slam, but with a fade. We watched the small email go out. We watched Voyager stop being a spacecraft on an errand and start being something else. And then we followed it. We followed it into the first century of silence, when nothing at all changes about the machine while everything changes about us. We followed it into the long thousands and out into the Oort cloud, that great, cold, almost empty shell around our solar system that most people never really think about. We followed it in a single quiet step all the way to the encounter with Gliese 445. 40,000 years from now, when a small red star that no one alive today has ever named will pass close by and be for a brief moment in cosmic time the closest star to our lost spacecraft, closer than our own sun. We followed it past the sun's own death, 5 billion years from now, when the star we grew up under swells into a red giant and either swallows the Earth or leaves it as a sterilized cinder. We followed it through the collision of our whole galaxy with Andromeda, through the reshuffling of every constellation, through the slow merging of 2 great wheels of stars into something new and softer and stranger. And in all of that, in every one of those moments, out beyond every one of those endings, the small silver machine kept drifting, and the small gold disc bolted to its side kept turning faintly in the dark. We started with a spacecraft. We are ending with something else. Because here is the thing that has been quietly building underneath the whole story we have told tonight, and that I want to name for you now, gently, before we say good night. The question we asked at the very beginning, what actually happens to Voyager after we stop listening, was not really the question we were asking. It looked like a question about the spacecraft. It was not. It was a question about listening. It was a question about us. It was a question about what our attention actually is, and what it actually does, and what happens to a thing when our attention finally, gently, lets it go. And here is what I think we have found over the course of the walk. The spacecraft was never really ours to lose. That sentence needs a little air around it. Say it again, in your head, slowly. The spacecraft was never really ours to lose. Because from the moment it left the launch pad in 1977, from the moment it slipped past Jupiter, from the moment it swung around Saturn and was thrown up out of the plane of the planets on a trajectory, it would never return from it stopped being ours in any deep sense. It stopped being a possession. It stopped being an object we controlled. It became, quietly, something else. Something more like a small piece of the earth that had, in a strange act of collective generosity, been given to the universe. We had a conversation with it for nearly 50 years. That conversation was wonderful. That conversation was one of the most extraordinary things our species has ever kept going. But the conversation was not the spacecraft. The conversation was the thin thread we tied around the spacecraft from our end to feel a little less far away from it. And when the thread finally frays and finally lets go, what remains at the other end is the thing that was always there. A small, cold, indifferent, honest machine, belonging to itself, on its way. So the question dissolves. What happens to Voyager after we stop listening? Nothing new. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that is not already happening tonight. The spacecraft does what it has been doing for nearly 50 years. It drifts. It keeps its aim. It carries its record. The only thing that ends is not the spacecraft. It is a chapter of our involvement with it. It is the chapter in which we were still, in some tender way, holding on. When that chapter ends, Voyager is not lost. Voyager is not gone. Voyager is not silenced. Voyager is simply, finally, allowed to be what it has been becoming quietly the whole time. An object in the world, a small piece of us drifting away from us on its own errand now. And this is where the whole story turns gently back on us. Because everything we have talked about tonight, the fading power, the last dish, the small email, the first century of silence, the Uit cloud, the encounter with Gliese 445, the death of the sun, the collision with Andromeda, the record that will outlast the world. Every one of those things is in some small, quiet way also about you, about us, about what it means to be a small, warm, conscious creature, holding on to things you cannot really hold, keeping them alive with the small 4-watt effort of your attention, for as long as you have the strength to do it, and then, eventually, gently, letting them go. You already know this. Everyone knows this. Everyone has done it. Everyone has, at some point, kept a small light on for someone they could not reach. Everyone has, at some point, tended to a memory the way JPL tends to Voyager 4 watts at a time. One careful year at a time, until eventually, the memory becomes something you cannot quite reach anymore, and you have to let it drift into whatever it is going to become next. Everyone has said goodbye to something they were not really ready to say goodbye to, and discovered later that the thing did not stop existing when they stopped being able to speak to it. It just became something else. It became a small, silent object in your life. It became a piece of you that had drifted, quietly, past your ability to hold. And you learned to live with the fact that it was still there, somewhere in some form, doing whatever it was doing, whether you were listening or not. That is what Voyager is, if you follow it long enough. It is a machine, yes. It is a beautiful piece of engineering, yes. It is a triumph of the small, stubborn genius of the people who built it, yes. But it is also, in the end, a very slow, very quiet, very patient teaching, drifting through interstellar space about the true nature of the things we love. That most of what we love the way NASA loves Voyager, not by owning it, not by holding it, by listening to it for as long as we can and by letting it be its own thing when the listening finally ends. There is not much left to say after that, and it is late wherever you are, and the point of tonight was never to answer the question. It was to walk with it long enough that the question softened and became something you could carry with you gently into sleep. So, one small thing before we close. If this walk has meant something to you, if this is the kind of quiet, deep company you would like to keep having on nights when the world is a little too loud or a little too bright or a little too fast, a quiet like, or a subscribe really does help this channel keep making these. It is a small thing on your end. It means an enormous amount on ours. And it means that the next time your mind is looking for a place to rest, we will be here waiting with another quiet walk out into the dark. And now, before we say good night, sit with one last thought. Somewhere right now, as you are lying there, as your room settles into its own quiet, as your breathing slows towards sleep, two small machines older than most of the people you know are drifting through interstellar space. They are cold. They are dark. They are almost silent. They are still tonight in this exact hour, being listened to by a small team of people in California, straining to hear a whisper 20 billion times weaker than what would run a wristwatch. Soon, in the years just ahead of us, that listening will end. And after that, the spacecraft will keep going, past the Oort cloud, past Gliese 445, past the death of the sun, past the merger of two galaxies, carrying all the way a small gold disc engraved with the sound of whales and the greetings of 55 languages and the brain waves of a woman thinking about being in love. None of it will be watched. None of it will be recorded. None of it will be witnessed by anyone, and it will happen anyway. It is happening in some very small way already. There is something quiet and enormous in that. There is something that, if you let it, can hold you gently on nights when the smaller things feel too heavy. The knowledge that a small piece of your species is out there, doing something patient and honest and unafraid on a timescale that has nothing to do with whether anyone is watching. The knowledge that it is possible in this universe to make something beautiful and simply let it be, without expecting to be remembered, without expecting to be heard, without expecting anything at all. That is what Voyager will become in the years just ahead, not a story of an ending. A story of a small, quiet thing that finally gets to be what it has been becoming the whole time. A traveler, alone, carrying us with it in the only way anything ever really carries us. Softly, without noise, without needing to be held. So rest now. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands unclench. Let your breathing find its own long, easy rhythm. The spacecraft is out there. The record is turning. The dark is very wide and very deep and very calm, and it has a small piece of us in it forever. Sleep well under the stars. Good night.